Welcome to the 2019 Research and Review webinar. This is our 6th year of doing webinars and sharing research openly. Supply Chain Insights is very focused on independent, actionable, and objective advice for supply chain leaders. We want to provide research with the goal of helping companies to gain first mover advantage. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share recent research, and in each area I'm going to tell you what I think it means. This is my 15th year of doing research in the industry. Some things change, some things don't, but there are some things that are important for us today. One of the most significant findings we had in 2019 was that satisfaction in sales and operations planning is declining. And we spent time over the year trying to understand why. We've had a number of changes of organizations, we've had mergers and acquisitions, but essentially the technologies and the processes that we have are going backwards, they're not going forward. And we've had a couple of trends. One is collaborative sales forecasting, which happened in the 2001 to 2003 period. And when we had collaborative forecasting, where we asked sales to give us input on the forecast, many companies did not hold themselves accountable for forecast value added. And so one of the things that we find as we go into companies today is that many companies are going backwards in forecast accuracy, not driving improvement that they thought. And one of the issues is the lack of discipline, the lack of companies' ability to hold themselves accountable to forecast methodologies that measure forecast performance at the lowest level of the hierarchy using forecast value add technologies in assessment, and to be able to look at bias and error. The other thing that we found is in the rush to integrated business planning, there has been a focus on the high level of the hierarchy, very focused on dollars, forgetting that we need to have alignment of mix as we tie it to strategy. So these two trends, while the intent is good, we find that many companies have struggled in the implementation. We also find that companies that have deployed SAP are less effective than other companies that have used other technologies. SAP APO was deployed in the last decade very heavily. Currently, SAP has brought out a tool called Integrated Business Planning. Integrated Business Planning has slow adoption, and now there's a lot of confusion about what will happen with SAP APO, and the users are not that happy with IBP. The other thing we find is that when we look at adoption, we have about 22% of companies that are innovators. And these innovators are looking at schema on read technologies for demand planning, advanced analytics, the use of the digital twin, and they're also looking at how can they drive better analytics into the sales and operations planning process using outside-in processes. The early adopters are following the innovators, but they're waiting and testing and want to be sure that things are going to work. And these early adopters are more focused on the use of today's technologies and just adding layers for innovation. The early majority trying to get the systems that they have working now, and the late majority and the laggards are hanging in there with heavy use of spreadsheets. In fact, spreadsheets is the most predominant tool for sales and operations planning. Now, why is sales and operations planning so important? Well, 84% of companies have a sales and operations planning process. There's 7 processes within a company on average. And what is happening is there are many processes going on simultaneously. And one of the issues that people call us about is maturity in sales and operations planning. And when I assess maturity, I ask, is there clarity of the goal? Do we know what we're wanting to accomplish, and how does that goal tie to strategy? And is there balance between the S and the OP and organizational alignment? And I'll show you where we are on both of those factors. When companies are better balanced on S and OP with the focus on the ampersand, they're able to drive better results. And when there is better organizational alignment between finance, commercial teams, and operations team, there are faster results. And then can people get to data and can they execute a feasible plan? You'll see that there are a number of gaps there. And can we tie sales and operations planning to execution? And do we have what-if analysis in the development of playbooks so that we can more nimbly get to data and look at the assessments? So the goal, most companies are still matching demand with supply. And the ability to do risk management or a feasible plan or the most profitable plan is sometimes out of reach for most companies. Only 57% of companies report that they're imbalanced. 21% are more focused on the S or the commercial. 36% are more focused on operations or the OP. And so maturity in sales and operations planning happens when we're better balanced. It also happens when we have better organizational alignment. So when we look at this, you can see that what is important is in blue, the performance is in green, and the gap analysis is shown with the greatest gap analysis being those in the red box. So sales and operations, manufacturing and procurement, operations and IT, finance and operations are all showing very large gaps. Now, how do you get over these large gaps? Well, you've got to get clarity on strategy and you've got to get clarity on goals. And most people, as you can see, because we lack executive understanding of supply chain, struggle. And one of the issues is that supply chain is made as a function within an organization versus overarching set of processes from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier. Now, when it comes to execution, we've really got a flip of a coin. 51% execute sales and operations planning most of the time. Many find it difficult to tie sales and operations planning to a feasible plan and execute because the plan is not feasible. They can't model the processes that they have. And when we look at the gap analysis and the technology, you can see that running the what-if analysis is a major gap. Managing the playbooks for opportunity and risk management is a major gap. Collaboration or the ability to coordinate is a major gap. And the ability to use technologies to determine the most profitable plan is a major gap. These gaps are larger when the technologies are the ERP-based technologies of SAP, Infor, or Oracle. They're smaller if the companies are using an advanced planning tool that enables what-if modeling and gives the feasible plan. So just be careful in writing your RFPs or doing your assessments to focus on what-if analysis, determine what a feasible plan is, and then work on collaboration between sales and operations. And I'm not just talking about, forecast collaboration, but the ability to have workflow to allow people to pass playbooks and to do what-if analysis between employees. Spend time on what that word collaborate means and also what a technology for profitability looks like. Now, when you look at the perspective of manufacturers versus technologists, one of the things that, technologists believe is that they are delivering role-based views for individuals within the companies and that there's heavy satisfaction there. It's not true if you look at the manufacturers who still feel that they need much better role-based views for companies and employees within the company. Now, the role of the financial budget in sales and operations planning is a little sticky wicket. When a budget is an input to the sales and operations planning process but does not constrain it, companies are much more mature. When the S&OP process is constrained by the budget, companies are less mature. And so getting clarity on the budget and the role of the budget is important. Now, I've done research in this area for 15 years, and every survey that I do, I get an output that looks like this. Getting data in a timely fashion has been a barrier to companies for the last 2 decades. And it's my hope that this is a nut we can crack in the next decade. But we've got to really think about the users of S&OP data, because it isn't just the users of advanced planning or the users of ERP, but it's the ability to take plans and share them across the organization. And then lack of support from other functions. We talked about alignment, lack of technologies that support the process, and we talked about what-if analysis, role-based views, collaboration, and then the lack of support from the executive team. And you're going to see the lack of support and understanding of supply chain processes is also a major issue in talent. Now, talent is the missing link of the supply chain, and we have a transition of talent. The guy who's in the middle light bulb is a baby boomer and passing the talent to the other employees as we have the aging of the workforce of the first and second generation supply chain pioneers. The top 3 positions that are in the greatest demand in 2019 is a data scientist, demand planners, supply planners, and sales and operations planning, performance management. And these are all heavily analytic skills jobs, but also require a good understanding of supply chain. IT, network design, financial analysts are less in demand. But let's look at overall job satisfaction. When we look at who's satisfied, the females in 2019 are more satisfied than the males, and there's not a significant difference between baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. Companies that allow employees to have a balanced work style, to be able to work at home and also in the office, tend to have higher satisfaction of employees. Overall, in the survey that we have gotten in 2019 versus 2017, there is a significantly lower level of job satisfaction. Now, if we look at why, most companies, continue to have employees are looking for a competitive salary. They want challenging work. They want flexible work hours. They want work-life balance. But one of the things that is changing is the ability for companies to be able to have that work-life balance that allows people to be able to drive that satisfaction that they're craving. The other thing that is challenging is that we need employees with the right skills and experience, and it's just difficult to get. It's a major challenge. We have a shortage of people with skills, and we also have lack of training, but more importantly, the lack of ability to embrace new ways of working, and the executive understanding of supply chain continues to be a major issue. So changing the mindset is a major barrier for driving talent. Now, I'm looking for people, again, we need people that are problem solvers. The most important skill is, can people solve tough problems? Do they have analytic skills? But we see in the recent survey that oral communication is also growing in importance, along with the ability to see the big picture. So oral communication, written communication, and those problem skills are really tough. Now, when we think about the fact that the data scientist was the #1 job, that's a gap. Many people talk to me about working with data scientists. They're bright, they've got analytic skills, but, not so good sometimes on the verbal skills. And also when we think about, supply chain professionals and executives, they want to have clear understanding of the goal, clear understanding of the strategy, because they're trying to tie it to objective functions. And that's a barrier because many companies see supply chain as a function that's reducing cost versus a cross-functional process from the supply chain customers to the procurement function and bidirectional. And that tension between supply chain as a function and supply chain as a cross-functional process is a barrier that is overarching in the employee satisfaction, sales and operations planning, and getting clear on that is extremely important. Now let's think about analytics. One of the big drivers in the last decade has been the shifts in analytics. And most people focus on the engines, but it's more than just math. What we're seeing is the coalescence of rules. So rules like ATP, allocation, customer-centric supply chains, workflow, which is needed for collaboration, along with the user interface. So the first image is to look at the user interface. The second is to think about the rules. The third, the engines. And the fourth, the workflow. We're seeing dramatic changes in all four of these elements of supply chain processes. And so when people think about engines, they are often starting to work on the emergence of the digital twin, which is going to overlay sales and operations planning processes with cognitive technologies to be able to allow people to test and learn and test feasibility. This emergence of the digital twin will continue in the next decade, and we see that in the area of analytics that we have a lot of work going on in data visualization, but people are evaluating cognitive computing, concurrent optimization, and looking at software robots and RPA and the use of cognitive computing and the digital twin, and we'll start to continue to have this evolution in the next decade. And when it comes to driving overall performance, today's supply chain, 1 in 2 companies feel like their supply chain's working well. Most companies would like to have a supply chain that's outside in, not inside out. So not so focused on the 4 walls, but focused on outside in. And the drawing and the imagination of outside in processes for many is a major change transformation. They also would like to have silos to be aligned, and we can't have this alignment without alignment on strategy and clarity of goals. They would like to have a supply chain that's more proactive, one that works on prescriptive analytics, senses, and responds. And we're starting to get this with some of the new forms of analytics, but the gap in agility is still very high, and that agility performance is 37% lower than its importance. And so driving this through analytics of prescriptive analytics, cognitive analytics, sensing, outside-in processes will become a goal over the next decade. So when we look at elements of business pain, these elements continue for the last 2 decades of what I've been doing in research. Supply chain visibility. The first thing to ask if you're really facing a supply chain visibility question is, what does visibility mean? Spend time. Is it just to see what's happening? Is it to get alerts on what could be happening? Is it to see the possibilities of what can happen? When did you know it? And when did you need to know it? And in what form? And spend time on what does that visibility word mean? Cross-functional alignment, we've talked about this, and the lack of alignment and only can happen through strategy and goal clarity. Higher demand, supply volatility, again, the ability to use data, but really troubling and underneath this is the executive team's understanding the supply chain. As a researcher, I've watched the supply chain for the last 2 decades. And as the IT organization reports into the chief financial officer, and the chief financial officer now has a bigger hat or a bigger seat at the table, the focus tends to be a bit more on transactions and pushing the supply chain as a functional role. And it really requires a strong supply chain leader to provide the balance to say, no, we need to be focused on the customer's customer, supplier's supplier, to be able to be bidirectional. So again, this tension between the supply chain as a function versus looking at supply chain as a cross-functional process. And to ask the question, do we have best practices? You know, we're getting ready. Some say it'll be a sag, some say it'll be a recession, that, you know, the markets are going to downturn. And our inventory levels are higher now than 2007. And when we get that downturn, I'm afraid it will take us much longer to respond to the downturn because our processes have become more insular and we're not as good at alignment on inventory as it ties to form and function. So what is the mission? You know, most companies are unclear on the goal. There are many different conflicting definitions of supply chain. This is from Wikipedia, that the focus is on total cost. And in fact, I just got asked to speak yesterday on reducing cost and improving efficiency. And then there are new definitions like ASCM, which used to be APEX, which is very focused on ethical, ecological, and economical. And there's the Gartner top 25 definition, which I think is more of a popularity contest. It's 50% opinion, 50% quantitative analysis, looking at a 3-year analysis. And then we have the supply chains to admire analysis, which we do to really have an objective view for our research. And our improvement ranking is looking at how many companies are driving improvement over their peer group. So the supply chains to admire ranking is based upon peer group, whereas the Gartner top 25 puts all companies in a spreadsheet and shakes them up. We take the peer group and we say, are companies driving improvement? Are they driving performance? And are they driving value? And these are the Gartner top 25 award winners. And these are the ones that overlap with our prior Supply Chains to Admire award winners. And this year's overlap only had Apple and L'Oreal. And one of the things that I find in doing the Supply Chains to Admire work is that companies aren't thinking enough about excellence, the ability to have resilience, to drive year-over-year consistent results, the ability to have organizational balance and to have a balanced scorecard, to look at outperformance against an industry peer group. You've really got to hold yourself accountable to a peer group because each of the peer groups have very different metrics. And the ability to drive improvement and performance at the same time, which is hard to do, and to drive value. So I liken the discussion of importance, improvement, and performance to these two pictures, right? I'm afraid that, you know, I really relate to the guy on the right, the guy that needs to go to the gym, has more body fat than the guy with the lean muscles. And you look at these two pictures and you say, which guy is going to drive improvement faster? Well, of course, it's the guy with the red headband. The guy that has lots of muscles will not drive improvement as fast because he's already at a higher level. However, his performance is much higher than the guy with the red headband, and such it is with supply chains. Supply chains that are underperforming can drive improvement very fast, but performance is something that takes many years to achieve. I find it takes 4 to 5 years to achieve and requires consistent leadership and clarity on goals to be able to maintain. And along the ways, we find a lot of companies measure too many things. They focus on functional performance, singular cost goals. Only 22% of companies can really get to total cost. Focus is short-term, not long-term. They don't really know where they are in the industry. And there's a confusion between financial reengineering projects like tax efficiency, which really looks at how can I design the supply chain for lower tax, or elongation of payables, versus the delivery of value. So the supply chain to admire work, which is now in the 6th year, was our attempt to define an objective measurement to be able to correlate what we see in the research to top performing supply chains and to be able to help supply chain leaders benchmark and understand portfolios. We'll do this again in 2020. It'll be our 7th year, and our goal is to write a book on the case studies of the supply chains to admire. There were 560 companies studied, 23 award winners. You can see that the retail award winners are those that have tested new formats, really driven a unique solution for customers. And the process companies are companies that have been focused on many years of improvement. Eastman and Ecolab will be speaking at our upcoming conference in L'Oreal. And in each of these companies, you find multi-year programs very focused on strategy and goals. Monster is a new brand, but very focused on satisfying consumers, innovation and products. And then this year we had a couple of companies from the discrete industry speak at our conference. One was Sleep Number, which talked about the goal is not to deliver beds, the goal is to deliver wellness. And that, delivering innovative beds is the way to deliver wellness. And in our work on the supply chains to admire each year, we publish the orbit charts, which the supply chains to admire are based upon the orbit chart trends at the intersection of supply chain metrics. So this is J&J, and in the right-hand side, you can see the averages for the peer groups. And J&J is a conglomerate of pharmaceuticals, medical device, and household products. And in the blue box, you can see that for the period of 2010 to 2018, that the average margin was 26% and the average inventory turns was 2.96. So then you look at the industry peer group and you can see that J&J has overperformed in margin, but underperformed in inventory for medical device and household products. And more importantly, you can see that the trend is going backwards, that they're not driving improvement. This is a company that at one time was very high performing, but has struggled to drive and maintain that level of performance. This is BASF. As BASF changed more specialty products, you can see that they lost both margin and inventory turns with an average for the period of 10% margin and 4.90 turns against the industry. BASF outperforms on margin, but underperforms on inventory turns. And so, again, lacking the ability to sustain improvement. At one time was a great performer. Let's look at Nike. Nike is very characteristic of an entire apparel sector that chased lower labor, but as labor costs shifted, they were unable to sustain what they needed to do. They're still outperforming the peer group, but they're not able to drive improvement. Same thing with Walmart. So this tension between improvement and performance, can we outperform the peer group and can we drive continued improvement, is really important. And it starts with a balanced scorecard. It starts with strategy. It's important to align sales and operations planning to the balanced scorecard and to strategy. And in that process, tie the functional metrics to reliability to be able to redefine sales and operations planning and to be able to align source, make, and deliver reliably to be able to balance improvement and performance. So my insights, wow, leadership matters. This is not about supply chain as a function. New forms of analytics and technology are promising, but require goal clarity. The more advanced you get on analytics and technology, the more you need to really refine your goals. And technology is only 10% of what we need to do to really drive value. Outperforming supply chains are not obvious. They don't always associate themselves with big brands. There are many big brands that don't have top supply chain performance, and it requires analysis, looks at over 5 years. And most supply chains make the mistake of focusing on single metrics like cost or inventory, throwing the supply chain out of balance because the supply chain is a complex, nonlinear relationship between balance sheet performance. And what we find is that companies that are able to have a balance sheet performance that looks at growth, profitability, cycles, and complexity are able to drive higher levels of value for either the market capitalization or price to tangible book. Companies that focus on innovation outperform. Those that look at customers and innovating for the customers tend to do better. And companies that question the status quo tend to do better. So we can't save our way to value. We have a lot of technologies that are coming along in the area of analytics. A missing link for our supply chain is talent. A thread through all the research is executive understanding of supply chain, clarity of strategy to goals. And I'm hoping that as you think about 2020 and you think about the next decade, you can help your company to drive clarity of mission, alignment with strategy, clarity of goals, and the alignment of technologies. So each year we have our supply chain conference, Imagine 2030, where we'll be challenging companies to think differently. This year it'll be in Franklin, Tennessee, and we hope to see you there. Thanks. Until next time, this is Laura.